All right, let's dive right into this explainer. Today, we're going to completely shatter everything you thought you knew about the medieval blacksmith. You know, when we look back at the Middle Ages, we tend to view history through this highly romanticized lens, right? Especially when it comes to the folks who forged the era's tools and weapons. But as we'll see, the gritty reality of their daily existence was far more brutal, exhausting, and just plain complex than any folklore suggests.
I mean, we all have that classic Hollywood image in our heads. You know the one, a burly hero striking glowing steel to make these magnificent broadswords and gleaming armor for noble knights. We picture them exclusively as the exalted weapon makers for the elite. But let's take a look at what the reality was actually like. In truth, not everybody was making suits of armor. Actually, if all you knew how to do was forge blades, you were pretty much useless during times of peace.
The hard truth is, medieval society absolutely did not run on swords. It survived on the incredibly humble, repetitive production of nails and farming tools. Your average blacksmith was really a maker of everyday hardware. We're talking agriculture, transport, domestic stuff. They were out there repairing broken plowshares, fashioning wagon tires, and literally hammering out thousands upon thousands of nails. Without that mundane daily grind, no building could stand, and absolutely no field could yield a harvest.
So, if you were to actually step inside a medieval forge, the very first thing you'd notice is the near total darkness. And no, that wasn't just poor architecture, it was completely intentional. Blacksmiths had to toil in the dark to better see the glowing heat of the metal. Since they didn't have thermometers, a smith had to judge the exact temperature of the iron, dull red, bright red, orange, yellow, or white, purely by its color. And in a brightly lit room, you just simply couldn't see those vital color shifts.
Section 1. Myth versus gritty reality.
Now here's where it gets really interesting. Blacksmiths basically had to deal with the ultimate Karens of the Middle Ages. Everyone thought their specific order was a mandate from heaven. Farmers would demand instant plow repairs right in the middle of planting season. There are even historical records from 15th century London of a blacksmith being held at dagger point, literally at dagger point, by a nobleman who was running late for a hunting party and demanded his horse be shoed faster. And if a customer misused a delicate tool and broke it, yep, you guessed it, the blacksmith was accused of sabotage and actually forced to swear oaths on holy relics that they didn't intentionally make a faulty product. Crazy, right?
Moving on to Section 2, the brutal apprenticeship.
You see, you didn't just wake up one day and decide to become a blacksmith because it sounded like a fun career path. Back then, career choices were made for you. By age 7, kids were already hauling coal, risking lost fingers, and breathing in toxic smoke. You were essentially born into the trade, placed in front of an anvil before you could even properly lift a hammer. With formal apprenticeships lasting 7 to 10 years, a teenager could easily have clocked 10,000 hours of backbreaking labor before they even reached adulthood. There were no safety guards, no child labor laws, just the relentless expectation to keep working until you dropped from exhaustion.
And just to build muscle memory, an apprentice might be forced to craft an astonishing 1,000 nails in a single day. 1,000. Imagine the repetitive strain of hitting iron tens of thousands of times a day just to make the basic fasteners that literally held a medieval town together.
Section 3. Inside the hellish forge.
Now, while the blacksmith was undeniably essential to the community, absolutely no one wanted to live next door to one. Neighbors absolutely despised the deafening, non-stop racket of the shop. This is perfectly captured in a famous 14th century poem where an angry neighbor vividly complains about the agonizing noise of the hammers. They literally wrote out the sounds of the strikes, Lus, Bus, Las, Das. City officials frequently got petitions to force blacksmiths to relocate simply because the constant hammering shook the stone walls of neighboring houses, and the foul-smelling sequel smoke just ruined local wine cellars.
But, amidst all that deafening noise, working the metal required some seriously intense technical mastery. A blacksmith cycled repeatedly between extreme heat and heavy, rhythmic strikes to execute their fundamental techniques. They had drawing out to lengthen the iron, upsetting to shorten and thicken it, and the incredibly difficult forge welding. That meant heating two pieces to a white-hot, snowball heat and hammering them together until they seamlessly fused.
Now, imagine trying to perform those delicate techniques in this environment. Picture standing shirtless in up to 2,000-degree heat, breathing in carbon monoxide and heavy metal vapors, all while constantly dodging blinding sparks. It was so unfathomably hot that archaeological evidence shows some medieval forge floors were actually sloped with designated drainage channels. Why? Well, because the blacksmiths sweat so profusely, they actually needed a way to drain the sheer volume of human perspiration right out of the workshop. Just let that sink in for a second.
Section 4. Physical and financial toll.
Unsurprisingly, the human body is simply not designed to withstand these conditions day in and day out. The physical cost of this job was just horrific. Blacksmiths suffered from a condition called forge fever, which was this brutal cycle of chills and sweats brought on by the constant shifting between the blazing furnace and freezing winter drafts. Skeletal remains of medieval smiths reveal permanently hunched backs, compressed vertebrae, and unnaturally enlarged bone attachments on their dominant arms from swinging heavy hammers millions of times. And that's not even mentioning their lungs, which were permanently coated in toxic iron oxide and coal dust. The consequence of all this toxic exposure is incredibly stark. While the clergy prayed safely in cool, quiet abbeys to an average age of 62, the daily intake of microscopic metal particles, carbon monoxide, and punishing physical labor meant the average medieval blacksmith was dead by the age of 47. They quite literally gave their lives, breath by breath, to build their communities. And adding insult to injury was the sheer absurdity of how they were actually compensated for this backbreaking labor. Actual coins were incredibly rare in rural medieval economies, so instead, a blacksmith might be paid up to 70% of their income in barter. Think about that. You're working in a 2,000-degree room to forge a vital plowshare, and your payment is a squawking chicken, a wheel of cheese, or a pile of perishable turnips. Your hard-earned salary could literally rot in your front yard or just run away before you even had the chance to eat it.
Section 5. Forging the colonial world.
Eventually, though, the blacksmith's destiny began to shift dramatically. Over in Europe, centuries of relentless iron production had resulted in massive deforestation. The continent was literally running out of the timber needed to make charcoal for the forges. But in the American colonies, there were hundreds of millions of acres of virgin forest. By leaving the deforested, crowded, and heavily regulated cities of Europe behind, blacksmiths utilized this endless supply of American timber. Suddenly, with plenty of land so they weren't bothering the neighbors with noise, they shifted from being viewed as a local nuisance to becoming the celebrated upright backbone of the New World economy.
By sheer necessity, they absolutely dominated the colonial craft scene. If you look at a 1789 directory from Boston, you'll see only 2 silversmiths, but a staggering 25 blacksmiths. They were no longer just survivors of a brutal trade, they were respected entrepreneurs. They embodied the new American work ethic, building the literal infrastructure of a brand new nation.
So, thanks for joining me on this explainer today. The next time you look at the everyday infrastructure around you, I want you to remember the men, and often women, who gave their hearing, their lungs, and their longevity to build the tools of human progress. The next time you see a beautifully forged piece of iron, ask yourself, what was the true human cost of that creation?